Thank you so much for having us.
So welcome everyone, both in the three-dimensional space and the Zoomiverse, to our wonderful event with the three authors of this beautiful book that they'll be talking about soon. And I want to introduce all three of the authors first. So first, Valerie Brown. So Valerie is a Quaker and a Dharma teacher, facilitator, and executive coach, specializing in leadership development and mindfulness practices with a focus on diversity, social equity, and inclusion. A former lawyer and lobbyist, Valerie transformed her high-pressure 20-year career into serving leaders and nonprofits to create trustworthy, authentic, compassionate, and connected workspaces. So welcome, Valerie. Great to have you here. And Marisela Gomez is a community activist, mindfulness teacher, public health physician, and author of Race, Class, Power, and Organizing in East Baltimore. She lives in the Baltimore region, where she's involved in practicing and organizing for healing, equitable community development, and land justice. She's the co-founder of Village of Love and Resistance, Baltimore and Beyond mindfulness community for activists and people of color, and Awakening Through Race, Intersectionality, and Social Equity. So welcome, Marisela. And then Kaira Lingo is a Dharma teacher with a lifelong interest in spirituality and social justice. Her work continues the engaged Buddhism developed by Thich Nhat Hanh, and she draws inspiration from her parents' lives of service and her father's work with Martin Luther King Jr. After living as an ordained nun for 15 years in Thich Nhat Hanh's monastic community, Kaira now teaches internationally in the Zen lineage and the Vipassana tradition, as well as in secular mindfulness at the intersection of racial, climate, and social justice, with a focus on activists, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, artists, educators, families, and youth. Based in New York, she offers spiritual mentoring to groups and is author of We Were Made for These Times, 10 Lessons in Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption, and editor of Planting Seeds, Practicing Mindfulness with Children, both from Parallax Press. Welcome, Kaira. And so I think the format of what we'll be doing today is I have a couple of questions prepared that I'll ask our guests and have them answer, and then we'll have some space for questions from all of you all, anything that came up for you at the end of the session. And we've got about an hour and 15 minutes, so local time will be ending at 11:15. So that's kind of the format. And so I'd love to invite our guests first to just speak a little bit about your own spiritual paths, and then perhaps talk about your work together, how the idea for your book came about, and the process of creating it. So by the way, the name of the new book is Healing Our Way Home. So any one of you would like to jump in? Okay, Kaira, why don't you start?
Okay. Can you all hear me well?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll share briefly that growing up with people who were really committed to basically the Bodhisattva path. It was not called that because it was a Christian family religious order that I grew up in, but they really were engaged very wholeheartedly and quite selflessly. I think was just a very powerful beginning to my spiritual journey, and it was a kind of a natural thing to find myself then in my early 20s at Plum Village and drawn to monastic life, because the structure of my life from birth to 14 was kind of monastic, even though it was families and lay people. We all lived together, lived very simply. So Yeah, and there was a real devotion piece that I think one of the things we all really resonated with each other's paths was realizing we each had tapped into some real devotional piece as a child quite early on. Um, so I remember when we left that community when I was 14, feeling very lost spiritually, like there must be something more to life than just, you know, people in nuclear family homes, trying to get theirs economically, So, yeah, maybe I'll let my co-authors speak and speak to also the origin of the book.
Yeah, great.
Marisela bowing in. Thank you, Kaira. Thanks to everyone for the welcome to your home. Welcome folks who came to listen and to share together. Thank you, dear Tai. That would be Thich Nhat Hanh, our teacher in Plum Village, the Plum Village tradition, Sister Chan Kong, elder nun in our tradition that continues to be very central to the practice, and to my co-authors, Valerie and Kaira, who really made this book a beautiful journey, a journey of healing. So it wasn't just talking about healing; it was healing. The process of writing the book together was a healing journey. So it doesn't get more real in practice than it's not a Dharma talk. Go do this, or try these 5 practices, or this or that. It was the practice of healing occurred, which I think speaks to the path, how deep and profound it is when we drop into it in a real way. My awareness of my spiritual journey would be since I was a child, maybe, I don't know, 8, 9, something like that, always wanting to be in a church. That was my the container for the quote, because everything's a container, right? Especially today here in Baltimore, the buds are on the trees and the grass is green and the container is always huge, isn't it? But back in Belize, where I grew up, the container at that time for spirit was a church, a Catholic church, where I would go as a child, and I just loved being there. It was so filled with an energy. It was energy. Even back then, I knew there was energy. There was an energy of presence, an energy of there's something else in this space. Can't see it, but there's something that happens when I step through the doors and I get real quiet. And then I sink into something that's very deep and beautiful, like kindness, like truth, like taking care of people. That almost seemed to, when I would drop into that, it almost seemed to connect to that ether of that energy that was in the room, right? You became one with that energy. Um, my aunt was a nun, a Catholic nun, who also inspired me greatly, because I kind of grew up being bounced around nuns' knees, and that was fun. um, uh, and I wanted to be a nun. If I'd stayed in Belize, I probably would have been a nun. It was an aspiration at a very young age. So that's at the beginning of the journey of spirit for me, and the connection with something much deeper than just this form. Yeah, and I think part of the other question was how it came to be. Actually, that's perfect for Valerie, since that's Valerie's idea. So I'll continue passing the ball on to you, Valerie. Thank you, Marcel. Bye now.
Dear Tai, dear Sister Chang Kong, dear beautiful community. It's such an honor and a delight to join you today. I have long wanted to visit Santa Cruz, and I've heard so much about the place, how beautiful it is. And here in New Hope, Pennsylvania, the traditional lands of the Lenape people, and specifically an area called Aquatong, which means spring in the bushes. And yes, this is a place where there are creeks and rivers that crisscross right under my feet. So it's really a delight to be here with you and to connect with you. And I don't take that for granted. I'm just very grateful. So and also I'm really grateful to have spiritual friends. And each time I hear the stories from my friends, Kaira and Marisela, it just lights up my heart. You know, this is such a great gift to have a friend that you can resonate with. So a little bit about my spiritual journey, and a little bit, Marisela passed the baton to me about how the book got started. So maybe how the book got started. We'll start with that. This was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, was it? Or maybe it was longer than that, 2018. I don't know, but it was a while ago. By chance, we were Marisela, Kaira, our dear friend Sister Peace, who is also a monastic, a nun in the Plum Village tradition. By chance, all of us found ourselves at a conference, the Mindfulness and Education Conference in Washington, D.C. And we were sitting around a table, and I don't know if somebody, Kaira or Marisela, it's so much fun to really show that photo because the photo speaks of our togetherness. So we were sitting around the table and we were talking about mindfulness and education, and we were talking about how grateful we are about being Thai students and having inherited so much of the community's love and care and wisdom, and wanting to share that with other people. And then I think we said, well, let's write a book. And literally that's how it started. We just said, let's write a book. And the rest is, kind of history. They say life is short, but art is long, and a book lasts a long time. And so the feeling is, this is a kind of inheritance, kind of legacy that we can pass on to other people. And that's really our calling and our work as Dharma teachers, not to hold this beautiful wisdom and knowledge and practices, but to share it with other people as widely as possible. And a little bit about my spiritual journey. So I think one of the defining moments for me was way back in, what was it? Way back in 1994, something like that. Yeah, so I was already a lawyer, already a lobbyist, and I certainly didn't go to law school to be a Dharma teacher. I went to law school to make money, and I'm not proud of that. It was very crass, and I've talked about this many times. So I was quite type A, very hard as nails, very argumentative, and really running, trying to escape violence and a lot of poverty. And so one day I was just sitting in my brother's apartment in the Upper West Side, and just down the street from the Riverside Church. And my brother opened the New York Times, and there was a picture of Thich Nhat Hanh. And he just so happened to be giving a talk, a public talk, just down the street from the church. Now, my brother knew zero about Thich Nhat Hanh. He knew zero about mindfulness. He knew nothing about Buddhism, but he knew a lot about me. And he said, well, why don't you go on down and listen to this guy talk? And I said, okay, I'll go down. And needless to say, everything that Ty was saying was the opposite of how I was living my life. And I walked out of that talk 2.5 or 3 hours later, and I was quite skeptical because I realized if he was right, then everything that I had carefully constructed was in question. And so I was skeptical, but a seed was touched, and I began to practice meditation and mindfulness. Obviously, this cannot be done alone. I practiced with the community over many, many years and slowly changed from the inside out. And that was a large part of my spiritual awakening. In terms of my early years, I spent 12 years in Catholic school. My mother, who's Cuban, practiced Santeria. So I had a mashup of Catholicism and Santeria growing up, and very much similar to what Kaira and Marisela talked about, very much schooled every day in church, in spirituality. It was something that I was breathing in and breathing out every day, but put a lot of that aside because of the drive, the grind to get ahead. So I've settled, but thanks for listening. I'll bow out here.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing, so personally, sort of what got you here and how lucky we are that your paths led us here into this Zoomiverse together with us in Santa Cruz. And Valerie, please come to Santa Cruz, all three of you, come. It's awesome here. You've been speaking, and in the book, when I was reading about your early journeys, and Kaira just used the word a little while ago, devotion, and Marisela used the word spirit. And you all speak quite movingly about early experiences with devotion, and for all of you within the context of the Catholic Church. And I think sometimes Buddhism can be seen as like quite pragmatic, very practical, not very mystical, and I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of this affinity for devotion in your spiritual paths and this sort of mystical and the relationship with spirit. Sometimes I'll get that from students, new students to Buddhism. I'll be explaining away about the nature of mind and how to work with the mind. And they're like, what about spirit is often the word that comes up. And so I would love to hear you three speak about just that perspective and that kind of longing, I think, that we sometimes have, that sort of devotional longing, and how that might show up.
I could share. So first, I'll just clarify my first devotional experiences were in a ecumenical, more Protestant Christian context in the U.S., where we would wake up at 5 in the morning or something like that, 5:30, with a bell, and we'd all go down to. We lived in an 8-story insurance building where the offices had been transformed into tiny bedrooms. Anyway, we'd go down to the second floor where the prayer was, and it would be dark, and there would be incense, and there would be singing, chanting, praying. And I just, even though I can't recollect like the words, I really remember the feeling of being in this like womb-like space every day. Every day, that was our prayer time in the morning, and the kids would come, and I remember on Ash Wednesday, we would have ash crosses on our forehead. Like it was this ritual time. And that got imprinted in me deeply as like the being together with everyone and doing something um, not coming from here, but coming from this, heart and gut space of worship. Yeah, even though I didn't remember, the words or the specifics, my body, my being wanted to worship. I remember that. I remember feeling affirmed in this collective worship. Um, and then, um, and then I did have a lovely 2 years in a Catholic school when we lived in Kenya. My family moved there to be part of the human and village development work of the community that we were a part of. And even though we were separated. The Catholics would do their special classes, and we would do our more Protestant classes. But I remember really feeling drawn to Mother Mary in the chapel because we would go there every day. And I remember just being there by myself and really praying with Mother Mary. Like that felt very, very close, the connection. And then, with my experience of Buddhism, the Plum Village path has a lot of devotion in it. Thich Nhat Hanh and coming out of Vietnam, which is kind of, I would say, the Plum Village path is a mixture of Pure Land Buddhism and Zen. Even though we talk about Thai as a Zen master and we talk about Plum Village as Vietnamese Zen, Thai's early training as a monk was all in Pure Land practice. Lots of bowing, lots of chanting, lots of, offering, and prostrations. And so that's a big part of our Plum Village practice. It was a big part of what I was trained in and sort of and really loved. I loved the prostration practices when I learned them, and I could really connect with that practice of just laying your body on the ground to venerate something, whether it was your ancestors, whether it was the earth, whether it was all the spiritual ancestors. Like that felt so accessible to me. I think for some, Westerners who would come to our community, that felt very maybe foreign or like, why are we doing this? But I don't know, maybe because of how I had grown up in this community, that felt very easeful and right. And I think, I'll just also say, Thai for me was such an important example and model. Like I feel like so much of my wanting to practice devotional practices comes from how I observed him. He was extremely devotional. He would be the one standing in front of everyone at every ceremony offering incense. He was the head of the ceremony every time, and his being was so, it was so an expression of devotion. Everything he did, if you just watched him walk, that was devotion. Practicing devotion to the earth. The way he picked up his bowl to eat, that was practicing devotion. The way he bowed, I think just this whole teaching of being mindful in every moment, which was his real transmission, was we can really live deeply each moment. That's a practice of devotion. So in a way, like the whole of the practice was a devotional practice. Whether we were chanting mantras or whether we were, walking through a forest or cooking, chopping carrots, cleaning the toilets, it was all, the teaching was every moment is a moment of devotion, because if you see yourself as interconnected with all things, then you have to bow before the toilet. You have to bow before a carrot. You have to bow before the cloud, or the child that you're, practicing with. So um, I really feel like that was his transmission very deeply, was devotion and deep respect to all who come before. He also deeply respected us as his disciples too. Like, he wasn't just like, oh, I'm the teacher. I remember in the beginning of a 3-month rains retreat, he switched it up. We weren't expecting this, but we would come before him and sort of ask to take refuge in him for the 3 months. That was the liturgy. That was sort of what you did, and we did it wholeheartedly. But he surprised us all one time, and he said, "I need to bow and take refuge in you. You are my beloved students, and I ask you to be my refuge for this 3 months." And he also started to, apologize for things that he felt he wasn't doing skillfully, and he made a deep vow to us that he would be more skillful. I mean, it was such a like, whoa, guys, just switching it up. And so he didn't have like a, oh, I can only venerate one way to those who came before me. He was so deeply respectful of his students too.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful story. I love that. So instead of, necessarily some transcendent otherworldly being to be devoted to, it's sort of all beings and all interconnection and each other. And that's beautiful. I love that. Marisela and Valerie, I'm interested if you have anything in this topic about devotion. Marisela, you sat on the nun's knees your entire childhood. Yeah, any kind of reflections on the role of devotion?
Marisela Bangin, yes. For me, the entire path is a path of devotion. I think that's why I connected to in this tradition, the Plum Village tradition, as Kaira shared. I also remember, I don't know what it was maybe a ceremony, but Thai saying, and it just switched everything for me. It was kind of a moment like when the switch went off, saying, you're not bowing to anything on the altar, you're actually bowing to the Buddha nature in you. That was profound for me, especially as an activist for all my years. And especially I think in the West, we really, and as Black people, we have a thing about bowing to anybody, because of that history, that history of being enslaved and having to bow down or die, right? And I think any marginalized group who have been relegated to being inferior and having to always put their head down before another group, it's a very deep trauma that requires a lot of transformation. And yet I remember in the hall hearing this man, this very gentle brown-skinned man saying, you're not bowing to me, you're not bowing to anything, you're bowing to you. And I could bow. I didn't even think about it. Something in my body just knew, oh, I am bowing to the nature of Buddha, the nature of compassion in me right now. And so for me, then every bow became this acknowledgement that I am also worthy of being bowed to. Profound transformation space for me as a person who had historically felt inferior in many power dynamics, in the dualistic way that we move through this world as humans: color, race, gender, sexual orientation. I mean, place of birth, language, name it. So to hear that, and to hear there is no separation. Wow, profound. And then the nature, the way our tradition in Buddhist particular lineage respects and honors the earth, the water, the wind, and the sun. The sun, my heart. Tai would say, there's something so deep and profound about that because when you touch the earth, and you connect to that which is in you, the earth that's in you, then you realize that there's nothing separate. That I am that earth, I am that wind, I am that fire of the sun, I am the water. The nature of this water is in me, and at any moment when I remember, I become part of that, bigger than just what this vessel holds. Profound, like wow. You mean I'm all that? I'm all that. So I think that is the divine, isn't it? It's always being aware of the divine in you. And that coming back for me, that awareness of this self as divine, this self as divinity, that is completely counteractive to what a society has been feeding me all this time. That people like me and others like me, we have nothing of divinity in us. And we still, every day, we still have to counter that, because that's the air we breathe. And so this practice, of touching the earth and touching something deeper that's in me that can immediately heal me. And I continue to do that touching of the earth every day, releasing into the earth all that needs to be, and receiving from the earth and the water and all the elements, the kind of mothering that they are always there to provide. And so for me, there is no separation. To me, this path is a path of divination. We don't say that. It's not very Buddhist, I don't think. And yet, in the Plum Village tradition, if we're present for every moment, it's also meaning we're being present for ourselves. There is a deep awareness that this self is in itself right now, divining everything else around it and receiving the divinity of everything around it. If we can, in that moment, be aware. And I think it's like this, another, centering prayer, and is all that. This is part of that, right? In any moment we are with God. Each, I think, different tradition has this understanding when we drop right into it, that we come into this moment of knowing that we have that, and we carry that in us. And so then how important it is to just be so aware and mindful of how we move through the world and what we're imparting and how we're making the world what it is. Yeah, thank you.
Wow.
So much.
Amazing. That was I'm so glad I asked this question. It's getting to all of these layers. That was amazing. Yeah, Valerie, how are you feeling about this question?
Yes, hearts for sure. I'm just totally resonating and in love with these two people who are speaking. Yeah, deeply grateful, and wow, yes, this is so true. A couple things that I would offer. One is the community, is so the Sangha is such a huge and important piece of feeling and living and breathing devotion. And sometimes we can forget that, in our desire or quest to live a devotional life. It is very difficult to do that alone. We need each other. you know, and researchers call this need to connect with another human being not just important, but a biological imperative. You know, I'll repeat that, a biological imperative. So it can't be underscored enough how important that is in our longing to live a devotional life, to connect with others on the path who can support us. It is very important. And also because, you know, we are in the midst of what many people call a loneliness epidemic.
Mhm.
Feel disconnected. So there is a great sense. You know, I heard you say that you had a mindfulness dance party. That's amazing. I mean, this should be happening everywhere. That, hey, flowers to you. So definitely this kind of joy should be happening, you know, should be cultivated everywhere. So this is a definite thing for me. And emblematic of the devotional nature of all of this. There's a lovely two lovely reminders. One is a story going way back that has been written about. Hey guys, um, has been written about a lot, and it was the encounter that Thich Nhat Hanh had with Thomas Merton.
Mhm.
And Merton said that he knew that Thai was devotional or holy, compassionate by the way he opened the door. He touched the doorknob. This is, again, this is devotion. You know? This is so clear. And then, of course, Thai writing and saying over and over again at his next manifestation, please do not put me in a box. You know, please do not put me in a box and then go and venerate that box because I'm not there, people. And I love that.
Mhm.
So when I walk outside and I see a cloud, there's time.
Mhm.
You know? And or when I drink a cup of tea, like, yay, there's Thai. I don't have to travel to Vietnam to go and venerate this incredible person in a box. And none of us have to do that because the the spirit, the legacy of Thai is as close as just looking up in the sky. So thank you for listening, bowing out.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. So, Valerie, what you were just saying about connection kind of segues into the next question that I'd like to expand a little bit more, because you all speak in the book about belonging, and the need to belong, and sometimes the pain that arises from a sense of not belonging due to the immigrant experience or being raised in a white community or moving around all the time, like all the ways that we can feel that we don't belong. And Valerie, you just mentioned, and in the chapter on practicing with racial harm, you say one of the things that's really coming to me is this kind of biological imperative, which you just mentioned, to be connected and feel a sense of belonging, whether that community is a community of hate or a community of love. That sense that I belong here is very powerful for human beings. And so I think about that a lot too. Just the sense of belonging is such a core need for people, and how it sometimes can be, I don't know, discounted or seen as, I don't know, weakness. There, especially in North American culture, there's just this fierce individualism culture going on. And I find sometimes I don't prioritize my need for belonging as much as that biological imperative is impelling me to. So Yeah, I would love for you all to talk about that because I feel like that's such a big part of what gave rise to this book, and even in the title, Healing Our Way Home, right? So, yeah, anything more to say about belonging, I would love to hear.
I can jump in, and then some people just walked in, so I just want to say hi to them.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first thing about belonging to me is being able to acknowledge our needs, that we have a need for belonging. I lived a good part of my life having no needs. Or denying that I had needs. I don't recommend it. And so to acknowledge that we have needs, the need for belonging, the need to feel resourced, to feel cherished, for rest, whatever that is, and then to be able to provide for the needs that we have, and then connect with other people who can also support us, I think is really important. One of the defining legacies of being a Black person in this country, and Marisela and Kaira have talked about this, is a sense of alienation, of being snatched away from one's roots. That sense of being displaced is deep. It's a deep part of my psyche. And so to be able to recognize that is that is a legacy that I carry, 400-year-old legacy, and take care of that sense of alienation, understand that I have needs, provide for those needs, connect with that sense, I think is really, really important. So I'm going to stop there. There's a lot that could be said because this is a huge topic. But thank you for listening. I'll be
Thank
right back.
you. Yeah. And Marisela and Kaira, love to hear your thoughts.
Marisela bowing in. Yeah, I think with belonging, I think it changes our understanding and actually our need, and the way we understand what we want to belong with and to changes. It has changed for me over the years. Even understanding what home is. A part of it is, I think, comfort, contentment, non-judgment. If one, I mean, why do we want to belong? Because in the places where we feel a part of, we feel less judged for different reasons. And so over the years, I see that the more that I become comfortable with just who I am in this body, what I found is needing to belong to a place or a space or people, to a group that confirms that identity. It doesn't become so great. Um, it doesn't mean that one doesn't want to be with people, but this is what I mean. For me, my understanding of belonging has changed as I continue to heal, and that's why the book is called Healing Our Way Home. Is this as I heal, I my perceptions change, and we know this is the Dharma, right? As we get still and we notice, and we begin to know ourselves, we go inward more, and we see more. We see why we do, why we hurt, why we have joy for this thing, why we have sorrow for this thing, why there's still grief for this. and we heal those things, we actually are changing from inside out. And then what it is that we want to be near and belong with changes for me. For example, just a simple example is there was a time when I couldn't sit still, say outside and look at a body of water. Now I want to get into the body of water and be still with the body of water, not, not necessarily splash around in it. I mean, that's fun too. And I like that. And yet there's something of the stillness and the reconnecting in a different way, because there's not so much so much unrest maybe that didn't allow that reconnection. So and I imagine that as I continue to heal, that's going to continue to shift as well. And where I feel I belong and where home is going to shift as well. And I think it's part of the path of healing is the belonging. Actually, it's really all interconnected in the healing. Thank you, Marisela, buying up.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so I love that we keep getting to learn from each other's stories as as we even gather in this kind of way to share and continue to look more deeply. What's coming up for me is this exploration, I've been doing with some of my loved ones who have been bringing up the kind of insight of codependence, like them identifying as codependents, and then me being like, someone described it to me. I was like, oh my gosh, I think I'm codependent. And then like, because we've had that conversation, and when we see, each other, doing certain things, we can say, oh, that's codependent behavior, that sense of needing to feeling responsible for things we're not responsible for, or feeling like we need some kind of reassurance that maybe we don't need if we just sit with that discomfort. And but I'm aware of how in my life I have mistaken belonging for a lot of things, like approval and there's a beautiful phrase, I think it's from Khalil Gibran, about friendship. He's like, don't look for a friend to fill up your emptiness. That's not what friendship is about. Look for a friend to really to beautify each other rather than you spoke about loneliness, Valerie, and that's so real. But if we approach belonging from this negative, right, from this empty space of loneliness, wanting others to fill that up, that's to me not really where belonging comes from. So I really appreciate what you were speaking to, Marisela, about the more you kind of belong to yourself, the more you belong to the world. The more you're at home in the world. And I think that's definitely one of the biggest things for me on the path, I feel, has been becoming a better friend to myself, like really getting to know myself, my suffering, my joy, and seeing beneath the surface a little bit more. What are my intentions? What's my motivation? Like really being honest with myself, but also being compassionate with what I see, because it's not always what I want to see. And that kind of being able to accept and befriend and see clearly allows me to feel like I belong more. So some of it really is internal. And I remember, even being in a very loving community as a nun, there were plenty of moments that I would feel I didn't belong, and I would feel somehow on the outside. And I had an insight once when I just took myself for a walk to just ponder like that hurt feeling. And I thought, I'm not the only one in this community feeling this way. That was my first insight. I'm not the only one who feels they don't belong. What would it mean for me to extend friendship when I don't feel I belong?
Mm.
And that was very helpful for me to see, like, I think we, at least in one way, in one part of the exploration of belonging, we can choose to belong. We can claim our belonging, and reaching out to like create experiences of belonging for others can be very supportive of that, of our own feeling of belonging. And of course, there is also, all the very real, the real need to be, to be in community that's loving. I mean, that's why the Buddha said, spiritual friendship is the whole of the whole life, not half, as Ananda said. And I remember a beautiful exchange once between a monk and Thai during a question and answer, and the monk was kind of asking about this question and like noticing his need for approval and not wanting to act from that place. And Thai, I felt, gave a really lovely response. It was something like, we shouldn't be dependent on other people's approval for our happiness, but we do need other people's acceptance and affirmation and like affection. He was drawing a line between this, like, I can only be okay in myself if people approve of me, and the very healthy attachment, right? We talk so much about, we don't want to be attached, but there's really important attachment. There's healthy attachment. Friendship is a kind of healthy attachment, and so I appreciated him distinguishing, like, yeah, we don't want to, because if we are doing things because we need approval, that means we're not free. We're not learning to kind of fill up the spaces inside of us that we can fill up. But it doesn't mean we don't need each other at all. And this sense of like being seen, of being guided by each other, of being affirmed, of being appreciated. He was distinguishing that from the need for approval. And so just to say, I think it's like, you step with the left foot, you step with the right foot. You need to fill up the places of hunger, of loneliness in yourself through your own befriending yourself. But then with the other step, you also need the sense of belonging to other people. And those two things go together. Like as you feel yourself held and loved in community, it's easier to do that for yourself. As you do that for yourself, it's easier to feel and to make those connections with others. So they totally are intertwined. Thank you for the
Yeah,
explanation.
beautiful. So I have lots more questions, but I want to give everybody else a chance. I've been hogging the mic, which has been fun. But what I'd like to do is just offer the opportunity for anybody in the physical room or the Zoom room that might have a question. And for the Zoom room, if you could raise your virtual hand. I have the speakers pinned for the display in the room, and so I can't see all the physical hands in the Zoom room. So if anybody on the Zoom, if you could raise your virtual hand, which you can get at the bottom of your screen, or anybody in the physical room, and we have a microphone at the front that we'll pass around if there's any questions from the room, so that the speakers and everybody can hear. Don't be shy. Yes, Don Neal, please.
Thank you, Tenzin. I first just want to thank you. I loved this book. It's powerful. It has shifted me, the process of that, and then hearing this conversation. Very, very beautiful. And so this conversation about belonging that was just kind of entwining through the space has me thinking about another dimension of it that the three of you discuss in the book, which is this idea of collective awareness or collective awakening. And I'm wondering if any of you might want to speak more to that. I would just love to hear more about how that shows up in your practice and how the process of collaboratively being in conversation for this book may have informed it further. Thank you.
Marisela bowing in. Sure. I like the last part about how being in conversation with this book may have revealed it or highlighted it more. So the collective awakening, it happened in this conversation with the three of us, right? I think I mentioned at the beginning that I was healed through the process of this book, and that happened because the way we engage in conversations on these topics, and some very hard topics for some of us, and then some happy topics, and listening to each other. So we had a topic, but we didn't have. We won't say the meat, but maybe we'll say the innards of it, the potato, the complex carbohydrate part of it. And so it was each person sharing, and I think this is really what collective awakening is each person sharing of their healing, their understanding, their pain, their joy, ignited, lifted in the other person something that wouldn't have come about had they not been in the energy of that, receiving that energy of the other person. And then that person then share, the other person then shares, and that sharing and the previous lifted something, awoke something, right? Awaken, it gave birth to something, or not, maybe, no birth, no death. So maybe it revealed, it manifests, something manifested because of those conditions, right? And those are the teachings, right? It's conditions manifest something that's been there, and now it's up, it's awake, it's been woken up, because it's been tended to, or something. Sometimes it's not, that word may not be tending to, but it's been stimulated, activated. And I think that was the awakening, right? Is being able, feeling safe, being with spiritual friends where you feel safe, who are practicing, right? The nature of the fact that they're spiritual friends mean they have a practice, and they will, that practice is engaged during the interactions, and together the three of us then are this collective that are waking up together, just like that, just these three people, bam, it happens. And I don't know if we, I know I didn't go into this process of writing this book thinking, oh, I'm going to wake up, together, the three of us, is going to really help me to wake up, and together we're going to wake up. I trust Kaira and Valerie. I love them both. We have a history together. We are devoted to the practice, to waking up, to healing and being better people in the world. And that holds, that's the container then whatever comes up in that container as we dialogue about our own suffering, our own joys, it becomes transformed in such a container, right? You see, so it's it's what Valerie was saying, is we need the Sangha, we need the collective. So even, and as Kaira just said, even as we do this work with one foot, the next foot, it allows a different way that we show up in the container with others, and then the way we show up with them in that container affects how we do the work. Because I know that through the process of the book, the writing, I would have periods after, in between us getting together again, where the thing that came up for me during the discussion, it was really alive. It was something that now I had to look more deeply in it. So in my meditations, it was coming up. Sometimes I got really sad because there was old things coming up that it hadn't been looked at in these ways for a while. And I'd be hurt again, and so I'd be taking care of that in between the next conversation, and then wondering, okay, what are we going to dig up now? But the practice, right? The practice allowed the taking care of. That's the transformation, and that's the collective. So it's always this in and out. It's a step in the step that allows it to continuously blossom. Yeah. Thank you, Marisela.
Beautiful. Thank you.
This is Valerie bowing in, and with one suggestion for the community, for the Sangha, and that is to actually engage, engage Dawn's question collectively, like really practice with this, right? And so one way that the community could do this is to, as a community, like have a book study group with this and actually practice, what, as Marisela says, was come up when you read some of these very intimate pages about belonging or liberation or ancestors or alienation or love, what comes up, and then to practice with that. I think that would be a great collective practice for the Sangha to engage in, bowing out.
Thank you, Valerie. Beautiful, amazing suggestion. I can tell the guiding teacher is taking that on board. She's nodding her head enthusiastically. Awesome. Yeah. Kaira, anything to add to the conversation at this point?
I'm actually just thinking maybe we give time for someone else to ask a question, since we just have 10 more minutes.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Anyone else, either in the physical room or the Zoom room, with a question? Yeah, Meg. And there's the mic right here. And if you say your name into it, because you're kind of small on the little screen. There we go.
I'm Meg. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First, I just want to say thank you so much. It was just beautiful listening to the three of you. I feel like I could sit here all day and listen. My question is kind of just practical. How did you work together? Were you in person together? Were you virtual? Did you have a sort of structure of each of your sessions when you get together? Giving us a little peek into what it was like to be together working.
Sure. Thank you, Meg. I can answer that. So it was a little hard to hear you, but I think I got your question was, how did we work? The practical process of bringing the book
Yes.
into,
Yeah.
was it virtual? Was it in person? So yeah, thank you for the question, Meg. When Valerie made the suggestion that we write a book together, I thought of the book Radical Dharma, and I remembered what I had understood of how that book came to be was they just basically spent a few days together and recorded and I think transcribed, or somehow it was basically the book was their conversation in this intense moment in 2016. And so we were not in person after that mindfulness and education gathering where we all met. So we decided to meet over Zoom and basically ask each other questions. So we drafted a list of all the things we wanted to know about each other that we thought would be helpful to share. And so we structured our conversation, each one around a particular topic. So we would ask this question and we would all speak to the question, but then we would also start to respond to each other's shares. That's what was so beautiful with the collective consciousness emerging, right? Marisela spoke to was someone would share something and then, oh, I hadn't thought about that part of my life, and I could unfold it in a way that I had never been able to before. So these were recorded conversations, usually about 90 minutes. And I think we had 9 of them or something like that. And each one became a chapter around a theme. And then, of course, and Parallax did all the work of transcribing the conversations. We couldn't have done this without them, our publisher. But once we had the transcripts, then we really went through them and edited and added and worked on them. But that was the basic structure, were these Zoom conversations that happened over 2 years, mostly during the pandemic, but they started before, I think in 2019 and then all through 2022, maybe even 2022. So sometimes there was like a gap of 6 months where we were, different things came up, and so we picked back up again, and when we felt we'd covered enough territory, we handed over the conversations. And then once we were in the editing part, once we saw what each chapter sort of was, we each wrote the practice at the end, because each chapter has a practice that's connected to the things that we talk about in that chapter. It could be a journaling, it could be a meditation, it could be a being in nature practice. And then we also added into each chapter like little boxes explaining certain dharmic terms or going deeper into kind of the teaching part. So, and then we each added our own recipes, we each added our own playlists, and the appendices, all of that was the written part. But I realized when we were talking about this book the first time, someone asked about, oh, how did you write this book? I was like, no, we talked this book. We didn't write it. Yeah. So thanks for the question, Meg.
Beautiful. Thank you.